I've been asked by the organisers just to remind you that if you can fill out your reports as to what you've learned and what's been of worthwhile, then Kate will give you the certificates at the door as you're heading out later. So it'd be really good to have some feedback sheets filled in, please. No, you're first, then Johan. So to start off the afternoon session, I thought we'd stick in a session about actually what these amphoteric chelating solutions do by the person who probably knows more about them than everyone else. So Michael Paul's going to do a bit of a show, and it's the same talk that he gave to us in Middlesbrough about 18 months, 2 years ago, to demonstrate things which I felt was very convincing at the time. So I'll hand you on to Michael.
Thank you, Keith. To start with, and it seems to be the trend today, I have to declare an interest. Okay, so I'll put that out there now. But the whole day for us was to achieve exactly what it seems to achieve today, and that was to incite a discussion and a debate about what we have available to us as a community. And I hope you have found that useful to you. I've found it informative, even listening to some of the speakers today about what we sometimes assume is going to happen if something goes wrong, and what actually happens when things go wrong. And so what we've found over the last 18 months, particularly because of our experience with the London scene, was that there will be 3 phases to decontamination. The first phase will probably be the man or the woman on the street. The shopper, the taxi driver, the bus driver, they will invariably be the first people to respond. What are they going to use? They might continue decontamination for 5, 10 minutes, depending on the speed of reaction by the emergency services. When the emergency services respond, that might be for 15 to 30 minutes. Different set of people, perhaps using a different set of protocols. And they will continue washing until they get to hospital. Different set of people, maybe a different set of protocols, depending on what they are using. And certainly today we've seen perhaps a little bit of an issue with the different sets of protocols and an understanding. So that was really the motivation for us to try and put this day together, to look at what we're doing as a community. Hopefully this is just the start of your discussions. So what we want to do is just to try and explain to you chemically the difference between dilution and suppression of a chemical molecule. What we call the difference between passive washing that we get with water, the dilution process, and the active suppression process that we get with diphoterine. So we're going to do just a simple, basic pH experiment. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Fergus. Fergus is going to talk you through what we're doing here, and hopefully we'll be able to get the pH meter on the screen. If we can. It's not coming up at the moment, but if not, then we'll get an independent source to check the pH meter as we go through. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Fergus anyway.
Okay, are we okay? Have we a pH meter? No, not yet. Oh, okay. This is just confirmation that men can only do one thing at a time. Mike can do the experiment and I can do the talking, or I could do the vice versa. Anyway, now that I have an audience, we're going to be here for quite a while. I know I'm speaking beneath you, but just to remind ourselves, we measure the pH of acids and bases on a pH scale. That pH scale goes from 0 to 14. pH 7 is neutral. And the gentleman yawning, I'm sorry. Anyway, there is also what we call, or what is known as the physiologically safe zone that goes from pH 5.5 to pH 9. And if we can get a chemical into that zone very, very quickly, it's not going to cause us an acid-base burn. Is that okay? Have I said anything wrong? No? Not yet. Okay. Have we a pH meter? No? Oh, sorry. Anyway, what Michael is going to do is he's going to show you the pH of water, which I gather is a little high in this area. He is then going to take two mil samples of sodium hydroxide base, and we will see, hopefully, the impact of adding water and how quickly or slowly that brings us into physiologically safe zone, and then the impact of adding one of these amphoteric chelators, diphoterin, on the pH meter. Okay. All right.
Mike, would you just act as the independent reader of the pH meter, and you can read out the pH to everybody?
I could tell a Paddy Irishman, Paddy Scotchman, Paddy Englishman joke. No, I don't. No, I don't. Go on.
Yeah, currently we've got 8.12.
Okay, so the water is slightly high. It's slightly basic. And Mike is going to take two mil samples of 1 molar sodium hydroxide. And we will see ultimately, or initially, the pH of the sodium hydroxide. I've never done this as a double act before. Thanks, Steph. Okay, now Mike has the pH meter inside the sodium hydroxide, and we have a pH of?
We're around 12 at the moment. 11.95. 12. 12.2.
12.2, which is fairly basic. You really don't want that in your eye.
12.3. 12.4.
Yep. Mike is now going to add water, which represents a passive rinsing, which is the standard that we use throughout, or you use throughout industry, etc.
Going between 12.4 and 12.8.
We're now at 50 mil?
Yeah, 100 mil.
Sorry, 100 mil. And he's now adding it into a beaker with 500 mil, and he's adding the water.
$12.3.
We're now at 500 mil of water added. Normal saline comes in industry in 500 mil dispensers, so it's done nothing really for the pH. He's now put it into a 1 liter beaker and is continuing to add the water.
12.3, 11.8, fluctuating between 11.5 and 12.5.
So we now have 1 liter of an aggressive chemical. So Mike is now putting the beaker with the 2 ml of sodium hydroxide inside.
12.7, 12.8.
Same stuff, and into this he's going to add the diphoterin, which is this aqueous amphoteric chelator. And
13.4.
and it will represent a passive rinsing of, or an active rinsing of
9. 8.5.
We're now at 8.5.
8.
That's the speed with which this stuff acts. Anybody, any comment? All that's demonstrating is that active rinsing. It's trapping the aggressive part of the chemical, it's binding it, encapsulating it, and taking it away from the tissue. And now, just to demonstrate, it may work only on bases, but Mike is now taking 1 ml or 2 ml of hydrochloric acid. Again, 1 molar hydrochloric acid.
Two, 1.7, 1.6.
So we've fairly acidic
0.7.
And Mike is again going to add the same, from the same dispenser of diphoterin.
0.5. 6. 6.2.
Again, the speed with which the diphoterin has brought the molecule into that physiologically safe zone. Again, it's trapping, binding, encapsulating, and taking that chemical away from your tissue.
Thank you very much, Fergus. Yep, as we said, just a very simple, basic pH experiment, showing the difference between active and passive washing. Speed is critical for decontamination. The quicker that we can stop the aggressive action of the chemical, the more effective that we're going to be in our decontamination. I think you can see that. But also what we've seen about the other ability, the hypertonic properties of diphoterin, that solution would also be encouraging the chemical to come back out of the tissue. So it's a double action that we're getting. The suppression action, but also the hypertonic action as well. So just, as I said, very simple pH experiment. Any questions on that as an experiment? Or you're quite happy with that from the chemistry side of it? Thought it was important just to let you see that. Oh, yes, please. Yeah.
My question about the residual liquid. Is there any issues with disposal?
No.
Just put it down the drain effectively?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's quite an interesting point because a lot of the things that we've seen with the way that street decontamination is done, the residues often become a problem. And we've had experiences of cross-contamination with the dilute water getting onto other people, onto other equipments, other surfaces, to become a problem later on.
Can I just ask you if you'd have added water to that again, would you have changed it
We'd
in
have got
any
the
way?
same. It's a passive washing, so it just dilutes.
So once it's acted, then you can wash it off.
It's best not to wash it off. It's best to leave the diphoterin on the surface to continue that hypertonic action for as long as you possibly can. All that we're trying to do, we're trying to monitor the two P's, pain and pH. So whatever we're using, those are the two indicators that we're trying to control. Is it still hurting? We'll carry on washing. Is the pH outside of that 5.5 to 9? We'll carry on washing. So those are the two guidelines. Not always will you have pH, so we need the pain. Not always will you have pain, but you need the pH. So two indicators, and certainly the hospitals will use that as a basic indicator to start with before they bring pH measuring equipment. Normally the pH, the litmus paper. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Yes, Mike, please.
Sort of
how would it... Sorry, I'm just asking, from not being in the medical profession, would this be classed as being a drug?
No, great question, Mark. It's actually a medical device. It's a Class 2A medical device. It conforms to Medical Devices Directive as a sterile product and an amphoteric product. It also conforms to the European standards, EN 15154, which are the new European standards for emergency showers. And so they cover some of the things that we've seen today. Things like water pressure, water quality, water temperature are all now covered in the new European standards, Mike. So to conform to both of those, the product has to be non-injurious to the user. Okay, so that's an important thing because that's an advantage we have with water. It's pretty much non-injurious to the user. Diphoxin has to have the same quality.
And just another, is there any other similar products available, or is this the only...
This is the only amphoteric chelating agent. In the past, Mike, we used to use things like buffers. Probably most people will know if you had an acid on, you'd put a mild alkaline on to buffer it. Or if you had a mild alkaline burn, you'd put a mild acid on it to neutralise it. The problem with buffers is they're quite chemical specific. So unless you're a chemist, you wouldn't know necessarily which antidote or which buffer to put on which chemical. And it would be different for each chemical necessarily. With this product, you don't get that. You don't get that buffering action. It's an amphoteric chelating action rather than a buffering action. So you get less of a problem with the exothermic reaction that you tend to get with buffers.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike. Any other questions? All right, well, look, thanks for your time. Hope you found that interesting, and we're going to hand over to the next speaker now, Mr. Chairman.
So thank you very much, Michael. Our next speaker is Johan Grundelig, who's come from London to share his experiences. And seeing as they seem to have more experience and exposure to people assaulting folk with corrosives than anywhere else at the moment, it'll be very interesting to hear what you've got to say about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me with this microphone? There's no, so I guess so. Hi, my name is Johan. I'm one of the A&E consultants and intensive care consultants from Barts Health in London. And yeah, I've come to tell you guys about acid attacks, or corrosive attacks, as we've been calling it. And I think always talking about this, the best way to tell you about it is to tell a little bit of a story of my own journey and experience with this. And the best way to do that, I think, is to begin with the end. And if I had to do that, I would say that, and that's how I ended up here today talking to you about acid attacks. But taking you back, I hope this works. Don't know if you guys can see this, but it doesn't project very well. But the date at the top here, for those of you with TV screens, you can see 2009. I was fairly fresh off the boat, having just arrived from South Africa. And I was working in a place called Northwick Park Hospital in Harrow, in London. Nice place. And one day I was in the department, and there was a trauma call. We didn't actually know at the time what the trauma call was, but there was some trauma on its way. And it turned out to be a lawyer who was being brought in by the ambulance crew from Crown Court. And she'd been the victim of an acid attack. We all were frowning and thinking, what has happened in court? But she was a dismissed prosecution attorney in a case that this gentleman was involved with. He was very unhappy with his counsel, dismissed all of them after the local Harrow Council accused him of some financial irregularities, accounting irregularities. And things were not going his way. So one day he went to Boots, and he bought a bottle of Maalox, or a Gaviscon, or something like that. And he poured the content out and poured some hydrochloric acid into it. And put it in his jacket pocket, and the next day he went into court. And court was in full swing, everything was going, the judge was there, the jury was there, were listening, and they were arguing back and forth. And then he reached a point where he just couldn't take it anymore. He pulled out the bottle, screwed the top off, and threw it at the opposing counsel. It hit the table in front of them and splashed onto specifically one of the female lawyers. And it hit her on her leg. And that's how she ended up in hospital. So I saw her as a patient, and she had some blotches of chemical burns on her leg. It had burned through her tights and caused a sort of permanent scar where it hit her. There are police officers in the audience here somewhere. Where are you? You don't have to hide. So I guess I see no hands. I know you're here. But that would usually qualify as grievous bodily harm. The court case then got stopped. Another court case ensued where he was charged with assault and grievous bodily harm against the lawyer. And of course, the witnesses in the case were the judge, the whole jury, everybody else who was in court, all the lawyers. And being who he was, he called every witness to the case to give evidence. And hence, I ended up in court with him asking me and telling me that it's a mosquito bites on her leg. And of course, it didn't work. His defense didn't work because he dismissed all his counsel, and he went to jail for life. Quite a big sentence. And you think most of these things, it's once, yeah, it's all gone away. And I went back to work, no other issues. And I want to fast forward you a little bit, about 7 years on. I was in between. I started entering training. I became a dual specialized, started doing intensive care. In my final year as an intensive care registrar, I was working in St. Thomas's Hospital in London. And one evening, I got a call from the local emergency department saying, we've got a guy here, he's on dialysis, he's refusing to go to his local dialysis unit, he's ended up here, he's got a high potassium, we need to sort of, as an emergency, start him on renal dialysis. Which is a bit of a schlep, a bit of a mission, it's slightly annoying, people just skip their local units and go somewhere else because they don't like the people. He got brought up, got put into intensive care, and I went over to see him. This was around 3 o'clock in the morning. Walked into the unit, and the guy sits there in the bed. And I say to him, so how come you ended up here? And he says, well, I don't like my local dialysis unit. They treat me horribly. And as he was there, I noticed that he's actually chained to very asleep prison officers. And I said to him, why are you attached to these two guys? And he said, well, 7 years ago, I was in court and some doctor stood up and he said, I threw acid at a lawyer that burned her leg. It wasn't me. I'm going to find him and I'm going to... Suffice to say, I took a few steps back and I made some excuse of I'm just going to check some results, something, and I never went back in there again. He didn't recognize me, luckily, and I didn't recognize him either. But that was my first exposure to an acid attack and the impact that it can have on someone's life. A lawyer was fine. Clearly, this man's life was changed forever. Things have changed since then, and what we're dealing with has changed since then. And this is more what we are dealing with, and I guess what you are dealing with as well. I don't know whether you've seen similar pictures. It's all over the news. And the impact that it has on victims are fairly significant. For those of you who are watching Strictly Come Dancing, Katie Piper has now also entered. She was the victim of an acid attack a few years ago. A boyfriend at the time hired somebody else who then poured hydrochloric acid, I think, over her face. She was a model at the time, and she's obviously gone on to campaign for victims of acid attacks, and of which there are many. Some of which you may have seen in the local news, some of which you may have seen on TV. These are just a few examples of people who have been victims of this, and many of them in London. And these are the perpetrators. On the top left-hand side of the screen, it's the gentleman who was hired to throw acid into Katie Piper's face. On the top right-hand side is a gentleman who got jailed now for, I think, 17 years after somebody whom he attacked died. Bottom left is is a gentleman who got jailed after a woman locally in East London called Reshma Khan was driving. She was with a cousin next to her, and they started an argument with this guy next to the road, and he just chucked acid through the window into the car. It burnt her face, burnt her cousin as well. They tried to drive off, tried to get away. They couldn't. They sort of ended up smashing their car. And it took a year or two, but he eventually ended up in jail. And on the bottom right are the gentlemen that they're, I don't know whether they found them yet, but they're the people that they're looking for who threw acid into the face of a 3-year-old boy. And this is what we are seeing in London. There's been a massive increase in these numbers. If we go back to a few years, there weren't that many. It wasn't big on anyone's radar. But if we go 2016, 2017, the numbers have just been climbing and climbing and climbing. And where in London? West of London seems fine, but where I work, where that big red dot is, that's where most of the attacks have been happening, around Newham. Newham, Tower Hamlets, Royal London, Whipps Cross, that sort of area. These are all images taken from the local media. Well, I say local, this was actually from CNN. So this is where it's been happening. And again, from other sources, Newham, that area is definitely one of the hotspots. And the average day in London at the time, this was taken sort of late 2016, early 2017, this is a sort of picture that we would see, where in one evening, interspersed by 15, 20 minutes, we'd have multiple attacks happening throughout the night, and they'd all end up in hospital, coming in with various degrees of burns. Of course, the other local famous newspaper. And this is 2018, so this is a bit more lately. So why are we seeing this? Before we answer that, let's look at why we used to see acid attacks. Traditionally, if we go back to Bangladesh, India, Cambodia, we would see acid attacks as honor crimes. We would see predominantly female victims and with male assailants. There would be some family dispute, a disagreement, and acid would be used as a way of punishing or branding the other person. It doesn't tend to kill the other person, but this is how it used to use. This is what it used to be. In the UK, we saw something different. We saw focal areas of high-intensity attacks. And as it turns out, most of these are gang-related. The highest incidents we've seen now since 2002, most of which are in London, but other places have seen increases in attacks as well. Newham has definitely been a hotspot. And what we often see is one person would come in with an attack as a victim. Half an hour to an hour later, we'd see a second person of the opposing gang who have now become a victim of a revenge crime. And then an hour later, the first gang member, another one of these members would come in. And this branding would go back and forth in the evenings, where they would attack each other and assault each other with acid. And knives suddenly were not that popular anymore. It's not that we didn't see knife attacks, we still did the odd thoracotomy every week. But acid was definitely becoming the thing to use. And it evolved from something that caused just criminal damage to property and people to something that actually caused physical, violent damage to a person. Now, as I said, most of the perpetrators are male. Many of them we don't know who they are. They're on mopeds, they're wearing masks, they're wearing helmets. Most of the victims are male because it is gang-related. Often the victims are white European because they're often victims of muggings. So they'd be walking down the street, a moped would suddenly drive up to them, you'd have something splashed in your face, and imagine what you would do if something wet hit your face and starts burning. What do you think you'd do? Your hands would go up, you'd cover your face, and you'd close your eyes. So suddenly, in a split instant, you have become the perfect target. It is now so easy to take from you whatever you have on you because you're covering your own face, you're cowering, you're blind, and you can't get away. So you become instantaneous to sometimes disfigure them, but most of the times just to rob them. The gender of the victims has changed as well. They've both gone up, male and female, in percentages, but we saw a greater rise in men as victims. And as I said, this is because of gangs. Knives are not being used that much anymore. Still they are, but it was, for a while, it was replaced with corrosive substances. And this is very easy to get a hold of. Up to recently, anybody could walk into a shop or order it online. You could order sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid in whatever quantities you wanted. Online, buy it in a store. And the most common products we tend to see was either sulfuric acid, it was hydrochloric acid, ammonia, and to be honest with you, drain cleaner was usually the worst. Because drain cleaner I think it contains sulfuric acid. So people would go and say, my drain's blocked, I want to buy half a gallon of drain cleaner. And you got a massive weapon. So sulfuric acid, we've been talking about pH, and as you can see, the numbers are significant. The pH varies from very low to very high. And of course, if this hits your face, it does start burning and it hurts like hell. So drain cleaner is the most common one that we saw. And this contains sulfuric acid. Very easy to buy, very easy to get a hold of. And you'd often be walking down the street, and just like you see I don't know, do you guys ever see the nitrous oxide canisters lying next to the street that people are using? Nowadays, you walk down the street and you see an empty bottle of drain cleaner, and you think, what happened here? And it all depends on the concentration and where it's being used and how long the exposure is for. And that's why diphoterin has come in as something that can work better as water in trying to mitigate that damage and also help the pain control. With acids, I'm not going to bore you guys about the sort of chemical details, and to be honest with you, I don't understand all of it myself as well. My chemistry teacher would now turn in his grave if he heard this. But it's coagulative necrosis. You get hydrogen ions that just denature the proteins with acids. With alkalis, it's a lipophilic, it's saponification. You get breakdown of the fatty acids and the cell membranes. This just continues burning. The acid tends to burn and stop and stay there. The alkali just keeps burning and burning and burning and digging through and digging through. The way you treat this, very simple, the sort of campaign that was started called 999, remove clothing, remove everything that has been exposed to the acid or the corrosive substance, and you rinse with what we still recommend is water, because not everybody has the products available to them. And definitely in London, a lot of the Metropolitan Police response cars are equipped with a 5-gallon tank of water in their boots. And the Fire-brigade responds to these incidents as well, because they have more water. There's an ophthalmologist somewhere here, I've been told as well. So there's not much you can do in the acute setting other than rinse it out. And you need to rinse it out meticulously. And you must be careful to check at the bottom of the eyes to make sure you get everything out. But just like Katie Piper, you'll notice when she's dancing, she will say that she's blind in her left eye because the acid has completely burnt her corneas off. I have to tell you, from personal experience, standing in front of someone and watching their eyes melt is quite a traumatic experience. For myself, but more so for the person. I do remember one day standing outside of Newham Hospital, actually walking on my way towards work, and a man running at me from out of a side street, covered in sort of a liquid substance, his face red, his eyes red, screaming, clawing at his face, saying, I've just had something thrown into my eyes, into my face, and it was visually burning his face. And we ran into the local corner shop, and luckily the owner gave us all the bottles of Volvic and Evian that he had, and we just poured it over him. They were adamant to call the ambulance, in spite of the fact that where we stood, we could actually see the emergency department about 20 meters away. But so perceptually narrowed by the trauma of what happened to him, and the ambulance did pitch up. He was all right, but still quite an alarming experience. Water is good if you have no alternative. Obviously, if the fire brigade responds to something, they don't have a temperature gauge on the water that they dispense. So people tend to get quite cold, and often when they pitch up with us, they are quite chilly. Hartmann's, saline, can use that if necessary, or if you have it available. I'm not going to tell you much about this because there are other people who are experts in this. But we are now stocking this in Barts Health, so that's the Royal London Hospital, the major trauma centre. Newham, Whips Cross, the Barts Minor Injuries Unit, I think, as well. And we've used it quite a few times. One of the characteristic things that we've noticed of the victims of this is you spray it on someone and they immediately tell you that the pain is better, because it, as the industry experts would say, it stops the burning from happening. So it helps a lot for the pain. And the other question that we then sat with is, fine, acid attacks, yes, we're learning from industry. We're getting a lot of experience. How are we going to stop this? And we thought the only way that we can actually work on stopping this is to have the law changed. I don't work in government, other than in an NHS hospital. I can't change the law, so we have to get the government people, the MPs, to do that. How do you influence an MP? They tend to listen to the public. The public at the time in 2006 didn't know that much about this. It wasn't much in the news. How do you influence the public? Media. How do you influence media? Well, so we spoke to the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, and we said, the only thing we can do as medics is we often write articles for journals, and sometimes people read these. And the BMJ is one of the most widely read local medical journals, and we thought, we wrote an editorial for it, created an embargo on it, and said it'll be available only to the news media for 2 weeks. And then after that it'll be published, and see if we can generate some sort of public opinion about this. Now, I made the mistake after we wrote this of going on holiday, and they had my phone number. And so I was in South Africa, and then the phone started ringing meticulously, and we started doing Skype interviews, and me and my co-authors. We did about 40 or 50 interviews, and this got broadcast over about 3,000 news channels all over the world. And along with other campaigns that many other people were running, the story about this started coming out. And people were starting to find out, well, why is this happening? Where is it happening? And suddenly people knew about this, not just through what we did, but many other campaigns that me and some of my colleagues and other people did. And it got the attention that it was supposed to. And of course, the attacks continued. And so people started paying more attention. And eventually, through all these efforts, the law has changed. And now it's legal. I'm pretty sure it's everywhere like this, where buying a corrosive substance under the age of 18 is illegal. Carrying it with you, you have to have a permit, otherwise it's now classed as a weapon, a dangerous weapon. And there are other people still campaigning for this, victims who are still suffering the effects of what has happened to them. Because the victims of this rarely die, but they will always carry the scars of what's happened to them. And it's no longer as easy to buy as a stick of lipstick. And as I mentioned, the way that we practice pre-hospital medicine has changed as well, with a lot of the crews carrying products with them now as they respond, especially in the hotspot area in London. And the way we respond as hospital practitioners have changed as well, where we use certain products such as diphoterine to try to mitigate the damage that has happened. So, what should you do if you are a first responder? Remove everything, report it as you see, wash it off with whatever you can. Eye injuries, local anesthetic, something like that to try to prevent injury to the eye. Think about using diphoterine and get them to the local emergency department. We'll hopefully stock something that helps. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say. Are there any questions? I've gone way too quick. I have like 15 minutes left. Question in front here.
Sorry, where I work as an A&E consultant in Yorkshire, thankfully we don't get too many acid attacks on individuals, but we do see quite a lot of people from the building industry with nasty cement burns, which tend to present at the end of the day or, several days down the line. If we're going to apply diphoterine, how long should we consider actually, do we apply it on the day, for a day after? How long do you think it's efficacious for?
Where's Mike?
I can answer that from my perspective, because I see these guys, and the typical mechanism is People have got they've been in welly boots in a cement tray. The cement's gone over the top. Their jeans have got wet. They're not really noticing anything very much until the evening, and then it starts hurting. And then they come in the following day, and you're 12 hours down the line minimum. And they've already got a burn at that stage. So we do tend to stick the patients in showers. We don't use diphotorin for this group of people. They sometimes get away with just a partial thickness wound which heals by itself with dressings over a period of time. But there are a group of people who do end up having operations. My personal thoughts on this are that this is probably not the group of people to use diphotorin on because of the late exposure, although I'm sure the diphotorin would still work. But the patients are then presented to us in hospital where we can bang them in the shower. We can then treat their wounds with dressings. And also with cement particularly, they tend to occur in non-critical body areas. So if a builder has, the worst case scenario, has to have a skin graft around the knee, then it's not a Katie Piper kind of experience where you've kind of lost part of your face, lost your eyesight, etc., etc. So that's just my personal perspective on things. I'm sure the diphotorin would work as a neutralising agent, but I don't see that's where we are at the moment. I'd say if we could just actually get people to be aware that it exists for particularly with patients with facial injuries, I think that we would have won.
Does that answer the question? Okay. Any other questions? There's one question. Not yet, as far as I know. I think, and again, Mike would be better to answer the question, but I suspect, sorry, for those of you who did not hear the question was, we're stocking it in our hospitals and in Barts Health. Does the London Ambulance Service stock this product? As far as I understand, not yet. I work with the medical director of the London Ambulance Service as well, and there are talks of getting it into the ambulances. That's the last I heard. This product would ideally be suited pre-hospitally, so to get it working as quickly as possible. But as far as I understand, currently they do not.
Certainly not in the North East Ambulance Service anyway. Not even in the pipeline.
I think to stock this clearly within the NHS, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the business cases we need to do to prove that this will have a long-term benefit, not just for the patient, but also financially. Any other questions?
Johan, thank you very much indeed.
So they're ready to go.
Let's have a vote. Do people want a cup of tea now, or should carry straight on with the industry experience? What would you like to do? Carry on. Fantastic. The loudest voices. So we're going to carry on with some of the industry's experience now, please. So our first speaker this afternoon is Chris Dixon. It'd be nice to have non-medical people talk about their experiences of things. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Chris Dixon. I work for a company called Fruitrum. I'm a SHE compliance officer. I've only been doing that role for about a year and a half now. I started in production. So like a lot of people who've already come up here today, I'm not getting any incentives to talk about DIPHEX. We simply use it on site, and I was asked to come here and talk about our experience with it. So, show of hands, who uses DIPHEX at the moment? Or the diphotorin product? Right, so who here is seriously considering it? Okay, a few. So hopefully this might be useful to you making your decision. So fruit rum, again, show of hands. Has anyone heard of fruit rum? So, right, well, I know you do because you used to work there. So a lot of people, again, a lot of people probably haven't heard about us, but most of the people in this room will have used one of our products at some point. So we supply to companies like Lush, The Body Shop, Capri Sun, and then we do a lot of kind of sulfide chemistry, which is kind of meaty flavours that go in a lot of kind of microwave meals, so things like that. So, like I say, we're a global company. We specialise in flavour and fragrances. We have over 31,000 products, and that is part of the issue that I'll get to in a moment. And in the UK, we have 5 production sites, 2 of them in Teesside. So, at the Teesside sites alone, we make or trade over 500 different products. We make them from a litre scale up to 5 tonnes. And because these are all different kinds of products, essentially what we do is we are using a chemistry set on a big scale. So those 500 products, we have even more raw materials. So as far as the chemicals we have on site, it's literally thousands and thousands of different items. So the question is, if you have production staff and they're using one of these, if they're using one of these products, how, in the event of an incident, can they quickly get the information they need to apply appropriate first aid? And the question is, in reality, they can't. So this is where the DIPHEX comes in. So I know Mike has already talked about these 6 categories targeted. So we use every one of these on site, and most days we'll be using them basically, essentially we'll be using all of them on any day of the week. So we have 40 production vessels, all of them are running constantly, and we have multiple charging operations, and we're always handling this kind of chemistry. So the DIPHEX offers a one-size-fits-all solution. So how did we initially discover it? So our now former machine manager was working at an aluminium production plant in Ireland. And while he was there, he found out that all of the contractors were required to carry the 200mm mini dab. And after being in discussions with their SHE department, who were very, very positive about it, essentially that left an impression on him. When he arrived at our site about 2 years ago, and he basically identified the issue that we have with having so many different products, he thought we will give DIPHEX a ring and we'll see if they can give us a solution. So initially we were dubious. Like I say, we use hundreds and hundreds of different products. And as Mike said, the mechanism by which they cause burns differs depending on if it's an acid, if it's a base or a chelating agent. So we were somewhat dubious that one product would offer a solution to all of those different things. We got DIPHEX in, we got one of their consultants, they explained to us how it worked, they showed us some of the studies that you've already, some of the information that you've already seen today. And essentially they walked around site, they took a list of everything that we use, and they basically did a feasibility study to see if it would work for what we wanted it to do. So we were very happy with what came back, but then the case was getting the go-ahead. So like a lot of people have talked about today, cost. So water's cheap, just get out the tap. DIPHEX, much more expensive. So I'm in the SHE department. I'm not worried about the finance. I just ask for it. Other people have to worry about basically the budget. So from our point of view, the main thing is reduction in pain and suffering, and then also no chance of worsening injuries by using inappropriate first aid measures. So some of the acids and bases that we use, if they go under the skin, if you're going to use just water or of the buffering agents that Mike was talking about, initially you're going to have a neutralization reaction, and that is going to heat up, and that is going to basically compound the problem. So that is not the case with the DIPHEX products. And the other thing is, which I know yourself and Johan have talked about, before we had this, the guys get a spillage, what do? we put them in the emergency shower for 15, 20 minutes. So in the dead of winter, hypothermia is then you've created another issue that we then have to combat. So we get around all those things. From a financial point of view, everyone in here knows if you have an incident, it costs a lot of money for various reasons. If it's directly, if it's sick pay, overtime, if it's just admin costs, if it's loss in business reputation, sometimes it can be quite difficult to measure just how much money that's cost you. So that was the case that we made. So we got the go-ahead. We decided we were going to use it. What we did is we took the kit that was recommended, which is essentially the eye wash and the 200ml mini DAP spray, and we put it in every production area, packing area, and lab area. So the recommendation with this is, if you can, after a spill, if you can get it on there within 60 seconds, you're going to have the maximum amount of, you're going to reap the maximum reward from the product. So essentially, the way it's laid out at the moment, that is feasible. If someone gets a spill in any of those areas, they can go, then get out of the cabinet within 30 seconds, and it can be applied to the patient. Now we've introduced this is a standard part of our first aid procedure. So regardless of what chemical contaminant it is, if something happens, the lads will put this on. If it was inappropriate, we'll figure that out later. It's not a problem. We'll just restock it, we'll do an investigation, and maybe a bit more training. But first case, this goes on immediately. So I apologise. We seem to have missed a slide out. I'm going to go back. So we got to go ahead, and then what we decided is all of our first aids on site would receive training. So DIPHEX team came to site. The feedback we got from our staff was very positive. They thought the quality of the training was very good, and they also thought the product was very simple to use. And as well as teaching them how to use it, they taught them why to use it, and made them understand how exactly the mechanism was by which it worked. So general impression is the lads were very, very impressed. So back to this. I can say that since we introduced it, we've had some cases where we've needed to use it. Thankfully, they've been minor, and basically the contamination, it was irritants as opposed to corrosive material, but the operators, they used it like they should. It was applied within 60 seconds. The thing that both the guys, when I've talked to them, have said to me is there was a very big reduction in pain almost immediately from applying it. Within a couple of hours, the visible irritation had reduced significantly, and within 24 hours, it had gone almost completely. And both individuals returned to work the next day, and we didn't have a lost time incident. So, kept it short and sweet. I know we've just had lunch and everyone's getting pretty warm in here. There's a lot of bodies. DIPHEX, it's a simple solution. It's effective. It's effective for dealing with a wide range of products. If it works for us, people have literally thousands of chemicals on site, then it might potentially be a solution that you can use. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. So what I would propose, if we've got two other speakers from industry, so can I get Adam Phillips to come and give us a talk, and then we'll maybe get questions from the audience to all three of you at the end. Have a seat again.
Okay, hello. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. As it said up there, my name is Adam Phillips. I'm the Health and Safety Manager for a company called NicePack International. Same again, quick show of hands who's heard of NicePack International? One person. Fantastic. Two with me. Yeah. NicePack International, basically we're a wet wipe manufacturer. All the wet wipes, baby wipes, cosmetic wipes, the PDI wipes used within the hospitals, we manufacture those. Okay. A part of our process, obviously the end product is a nice lotion-rich product which you can wipe on your baby's bottom. but part of the manufacturing process obviously requires some chemicals to be used in the neat format, which are classed as irritants. We do also use corrosive chemicals within our process, so sodium hydrochloride and sodium hydroxide for cleaning and such things. So we do come across chemicals on a daily basis, and we do use them quite frequently as well. The reason I've come here, I was asked to come and speak because we have used diphoterine a number of times. This is where I've messed everything up now. I just did a roll. Oh, okay. So we had back in 2010, we had a serious eye injury in one of our manufacturing plants in North Wales, in Flint. What actually happened? Roll too far. We had a chemical handling operative. He was 28 years of age. He was handling a lidded bucket. He tripped whilst walking upstairs with 28% caustic and DI water. That came into contact with his eye, and he wasn't wearing any PPE. Okay. He was held down, and that's the key term there. He was held down. He was in considerable amount of pain. Two of his colleagues were holding him down while trying to use saline solution. So 500 ml bottles of saline solution. They used a number of them. Obviously, they called an ambulance. He was kept in hospital for over a month, and he had immediate loss to sight in one of his eyes. Several consultant appointments where they obviously tried to regain his sight. Lots of operations, lots of procedures to try and help the gentleman. After 12 months, this is my non-medical description. The eye burst, and there was an emergency operation to remove it. So obviously this gentleman at 28 years of age obviously suffered a serious life-changing incident. Obviously this, from a company perspective, this guy was out of work for a long period of time. From a financial perspective, we had to obviously replace that gentleman with someone to do his job. There was obviously a claims culture within this country, so this gentleman put a claim against the company, which, quite rightly so, he was successful in achieving. There was lots of discussion within the health and safety executive about our procedures and how we manage use of chemicals on site. So we had lots of involvement from outside parties where they came down, obviously, to review our procedures. Part of that process, 6 months after, when we did some research with the aid of outside parties, obviously diphoterine was introduced. We had a similar incident where a technician was investigating a blockage on the tank that contained the caustic and the DI water. Pipework failure resulted in the injured person being sprayed with a solution wearing a visor, which is deemed inadequate. Diphoterine was used within 30 seconds. The injured person was sent to hospital where he was given eye drops that he used for 1 month. He went home that night and went and saw his family. And all he did was used the 50 ml eye wash solution. So he had the same chemical in the eye, same concentration, and he went home that evening with eye drops, as opposed to 12 months later losing his eye. Obviously, he had his vision returned to full. Now, obviously, one of the things that stands out is the investigation of how this happened, how this incident was allowed to happen. There was lots of challenge on, obviously, procedures and behaviours on how they inspect the PP prior to use and everything. But the fundamental thing is he used diphoterine, he'd undergone the training, been lots of communication within the business, and that diphoterine, from my layman's term, saved his vision, saved his eye. There's lots of talks about costs and prices, but there's something at the back of this room that every building I've ever been to in the UK has to have. That's a fire extinguisher. I pay approximately £1,200 a year for a company to come round and service all the fire extinguishers we've got in our facility. Me personally, I've never discharged a fire extinguisher apart from a training scenario. But that costs me a lot of money. We spend, as a business, approximately £400 to £500 a year on the use of diphoterine. And in that time, we've obviously saved this gentleman's vision. We've had a number of minor incidents where we've had a lady with sodium hydroxide splash onto the back of her hand. She was wearing nitrile gloves, but it splashed onto the back of her hand and ran down the back of the glove. This lady, obviously, she worked within a laboratory area. She'd been trained on the use of diphoterine. She had a micro DAP next to her workstation. She removed the gloves, sprayed the micro DAP, sprayed the diphoterine on the back of her hand, and as a number of people have said throughout this presentation, she said the pain was instantaneously surpassed. So it went from being an irritant, causing her pain, getting worse, to spraying this on for instant relief. We've had a number of scenarios where people are using it instead of the saline solution, which, as Chris was saying, we do an investigation to understand the causes and why people are using it. But at the end of the day, if somebody uses a diphoterine, I can worry about the investigation. The fact that the person has been treated and there's no further injury, there's no continuation of injury, that's obviously the selling point for us. Okay? Any questions? Are we waiting for the end, yeah? Thank you.
I was worried that I had what I call the graveyard shift, but there's not so many people who have bailed out. Maybe it's because we're running ahead of time. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Steph Williams. Steph, I get mistaken for a girl unless people actually meet me or speak to me before they physically see me. So I had that at the hotel this morning, actually. So I have got no affiliation to DIPHEX or diphoterine or any of the products, other than the fact that I was converted. How many years ago, Mike? Is Mike still in the room? Is he gone? It was a few years ago. So I've listened today with great joy, hopefully, that many more of you will be converted and go out of here and do something about it, because I think it's crazy that this product exists on the market and not more places have got it in without the reason for the fact that people don't want to put their hands in their pockets. So I'm not going to bore you to tears. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint, so I'll give you a brief overview of where I started and where I am to today. I've taken a little bit of a different tack. I'm going to share what we're doing within my organisation with approach to safety, and specifically what we're calling life-changing events. And just think about chemical accidents when you think about life-changing events. And then just one slide on how I got introduced to diphoterine and DIPHEX, the company. So before I joined Carlsberg and Wincanton, because we were a supply chain organisation that worked for Carlsberg, I was actually born on a very sleepy island of Mull on the west coast of Scotland. So my first money was earned as a farmhand many, many years ago. I won't tell you how many years ago. Before I moved to what they call civilization, if I could change any of the decisions in life, it would be to move back to the Isle of Mull. But I went to Leeds, started at the Carlsberg Brewery many years ago, did a quick stint at Isle of Foods, also in Leeds, before doing nearly 10 years with the Coca-Cola system. That was where I was introduced to DIPHEX, and I'll talk more about them in a second. I now work for an American packaging company called Sunoco. I'll do what all the other speakers have done. Hands up, who's heard of Sunoco? Wow. Oh, you guys will have done. Hands up, who's heard of Pringles? Yeah, there's a different response. Every Pringles tin, or virtually every Pringles tin that exists in the world, will be made with our products. So in one of my divisions, we make the paper board that provides to one of our other plants that converts that into the tube, and then we take that to the Pringles factory and they put the crisps in it. Having seen that process, I don't buy Pringles anymore. So I started with the Coca-Cola group back in 2006. I worked through various roles. I started in distribution and logistics. And one day, somebody from the beautiful department of HR approached me and said, "We've been talking about you, and There's going to be a role coming up soon, and we'd like you to consider taking it on. And when she said it was health and safety, I burst out laughing because it had never, ever been on my radar. I'd never thought about even thinking about working in health and safety. And in fact, every time I saw health and safety guys walking towards me, I used to walk in the opposite direction. So after I got over my laughter and wondering why on earth they want me to do that, and gave it just consideration, moved into post. And I'll be honest, my only regret is that I didn't do it sooner. And I say to people who don't really understand health and safety, you know, what can be better than getting up every morning, going to work to make sure that people either don't get hurt or are not made ill at work, regardless of what industry you work in. You know, whether it's an office environment or heavy petrochemical industry, it doesn't matter what it is. You know, what can be better? So that normal glazed look that you get with people when you say that I work in health and safety, and they try and look for someone else to go and have a drink with in a bar, then you know, I try and tack that differently. So, and I think with my background of having worked in direct operations and having to have had health and safety support, and then going to the side of actually being in health and safety, it's given me kind of both sides of the story to work with. So we had a lot of challenges in the coke system with chemicals. So we were using caustic every day for cleaning the pipes. So I think somebody mentioned earlier about cleaning and stripping. So it was 40% plus caustic we were using. And for those in the safety world, there's a very famous speaker now. He's famous for completely the wrong reasons, to be fair. A guy called Ken Woodward. I don't know if anybody's heard of Ken. Hands up if you have. Yeah, okay. So you know, anybody that knows Ken knows that he's blind in both eyes. And I think it was you that talked earlier, or Johan, about the pain involved with his eyeballs. He had to have at least one eyeball from memory removed. And that was in a coke factory, actually, in London. Many, many years ago. It was about 20, must be 25 years ago now that the accident happened. But he ultimately took on a job without being trained to do so. Thought he was helping one of his colleagues out, was not wearing the correct PPE. He mixed two chemicals together that should never, ever have met, and was stood above the container when he did it. Huge explosion up into his face, blew him backwards, and you know, the guy was blinded for the rest of his life. Ken's got a fantastic sense of humour, if anybody that's met him. You know, the story he told me, he still does it apparently. When it comes to the Sunday drive out, he'll jump into the driver's side of the car, and the kids will go, "You can't drive, Grandad, you can't see where you're going." But you know, he tells some dreadful stories about, you know, where he lives by the sea, that he's never ever seen it. He can smell it just because his senses in his nose have been affected as well. So, you know, I just know if we'd have had diphoterine around at that time, you know, the circumstances maybe would have been a bit different for Ken. There was then another one that we dealt with at the Wakefield factory. This was prior to us having the product on site, where two guys were troubleshooting an issue. And they stood on a no-step valve, split the valve apart, which was running full caustic at quite a high temperature, and it caused a spray. And one of the guys on the wrong side of the spray, and he couldn't get out other than walking through it. So he had to walk through the spray of caustic. So he was completely covered from head to toe. He suffered severe scarring to his body. Luckily, it didn't get into his eyes, but again, you know, if we'd have had the product on site, there'd have been a different outcome for those people who did experience life-changing events. So this is my world now. I've been having conversations over the last 24 hours. It sounds glamorous when you say that you travel for work. Trust me, it's not. You know, I travel probably 70 or 80% of my time. There's nothing glamorous about getting up at 2 in the morning. There's nothing glamorous about Manchester Airport. All planes are the same. So I cover 35 operations in 2 divisions across 17 countries. So that consists at the moment of 4 paper mills. It's a very heavy, dirty, horrible industry for anyone that's ever been in a paper mill. And then from that mill, we send the product into our conversion plants, which are less hazardous. They're a much cleaner environment. And that's where they convert our product into the tube or a core, where I talked about the Pringles cans earlier. Overall, with Sunoco generally, we've got about 400 operations. It keeps changing every week because we keep selling businesses and buying more. But it's around about the 400 mark across about 35 plus countries. Ultimately, anything that needs packaging, our organisation will do it. So Duracell batteries, Gillette razors, L'Oreal, you know, all the big names. You'll have handled one of our products at some point today, I'm sure. Where I said earlier that I was going to talk briefly about our different approach to safety, and this can involve, you know, obviously, you know, chemical incidents. Sunoco have inherently been focused on trying to eliminate all injuries, and you'll hear that a lot. You know, let's get a zero injury. You hear a lot during the industry, and let's have no accidents. Well, in reality, you know, that's a blue sky thinking. You know, accidents happen. Of course, we're all working to try and minimise or reduce or eliminate them. But what we've tried to do of late is concentrate on what we're classing as life-changing events. So don't spend so much time on a paper cut or something quite minor where nothing serious is going to happen to that individual. They haven't had any time off work, no time really away from their workstation other than the first aid administered. You know, they're back at work with no issues. We went down the wrong path of spending a load of time investigating every incident in the same manner, and it's a waste of people's time and energy. So what we've now done is categorized what we call life-changing event potentials, and we're putting real emphasis on that, and I'll briefly talk about what they are. Chemicals is going to be added into this. I'm lucky because I've only got the 4 sites that have chemicals in the site. So the paper mills have got a lot of caustic involved with them. The conversion plants don't. I do have other operations within Sunoco that have a lot of chemicals in there, so we're going to add that into this pack of 7. What makes this approach differently? So anybody from the safety world will be very familiar with Heinrich's or Bird's approach to this, which has been around since the 1960s, I think, where the belief has always been that if you work on the bottom of the triangle and report near misses and work on the unsafe conditions, that ultimately you'll prevent something happening at the top end of the triangle, you know, the more serious incidents, the life-changing events or fatalities. That myth over the last kind of 2 to 3 years has really been pulled apart. And I've certainly dealt with 2 or 3 incidents over the last year where that myth about the fact that you work on these lower ones means you'll stop this. It's not the case. We had an incident just in January in Italy where a guy lost half his arm. There's been no reports about the hazards that are involved with that task that that guy was doing. You know, and that mill's been running for nearly 25, 26 years. Not one report about how dangerous this task was. So, you know, there was nothing reported in this bottom box to give us that indication that something like that could happen. You know, now I've got a 28-year-old lad wandering around with half his right arm missing, so that wasn't a pleasant thing to deal with. So I often like this as well when you go onto sites, and it's great that sites are proud when you see when you arrive at reception and it says we are 480 odd days without the last accident on site. You know, and some people go, yeah, that's great, but you know, I live in a world, and maybe it's a dark world I live in, but I live in a world where I know sat here now that can change within a nanosecond. So, you know, people who think that they're up at the 400, 500, 600 days or longer without an accident, you know, if you think you've got a safe site, then you know, really ask yourself, have you? And that kind of links into this. So, you know, traditionally in Sunoco, where I am now, and really Coke to a degree, we're in this world of relying upon what we call traditional injury prevention, which is around rules and standards. You know, I always say paperwork isn't to stop people getting hurt. Yeah, you need it. You need your risk assessments, etc. But you know, on single point protection, and you know, the amount of times I hear, "God, why did that guy do that stupid thing?" You know, I don't know about you, but I don't employ stupid people. The guys I've got working in our facilities are not stupid. You know, they make decisions and ultimately end up getting hurt, not because they wanted to do that. They didn't wake up today saying, "Today I'm going to go into work and get hurt." You know, people don't look deep enough into it. It's an easy thing to say, isn't it? What a stupid thing that person did. They never look at the management issues and the organizational issues behind that. And that's what this is about over here with what we call the human performance systems. You know, so we've seen a trend. We've done some analysis recently on where we consider there to be issues with management, and then you look at their stats as far as their team's accidents are concerned, there's a direct correlation compared to the people that are far more safety aware and far more safety conscious. Their teams don't have accidents. There's a lot to be said for that. And then we've got specific controls I mentioned earlier around life-changing events. We've now started doing very detailed risk-based systems. So, you know, for anybody that's in my world as well that reads the safety documentation week in, week out, where the HSE have investigated a serious incident, you can guarantee that they will put in there that the risk assessment was unsuitable, not sufficient. And, you know, we found that with a lot of ours. So lots of tasks, as I mentioned that one in Italy, you know, the risk assessment didn't highlight that issue at all. And those guys are doing that job every single day, have been doing for years. It's just luck that no one got hurt up until January. Kind of controls we're going to do. So what we've done is turned that triangle upside down. You know, and I've stolen one of Mike's sayings, which is when you talk about diphottering or PPE in general, you know, whether it's your saline eye wash or your showers, that isn't first aid. You know, if it's got to that stage, and it was Mike that introduced me to this saying, it's last aid. You know, if you're having to apply diphottering or saline eye wash, or you're rushing someone to the first aid or further away, then, you know, everything else has failed. You know, what you've got to do is look at making sure something like that doesn't happen in the first place. And that's a different way of you looking at your businesses and looking at your processes. So that's where we are now. We started on this journey about 18 months ago. And it's going to take time. That's a big message that we've got to put through to the board. You know, don't think that this is going to happen, you know, overnight. It won't happen in a year. It's, you know, we're on a 5-6 year turnaround plan because these things just don't happen quickly. I won't bore you to details with this. This is just our strategy. I think it's important that you've got one. So these are the areas, and this may change a little bit as we move through the next 5 to 6 years, but these are the areas we're working on. And we've shared that with the operational teams to make sure they understand and are continued reminded of that as well. Last slide. I really don't like salespeople. See all the heads turning and going, how dare you say that? And I'm always very skeptical when somebody either sends you the mail or, I mean, LinkedIn's the more favorite one now, isn't it? You connect with somebody, and then within about 5 minutes, you get a nice little spiel of, oh, thanks for connecting. If I could be of any assistance, you was like, no. Now, poor Mike was that guy, because he kept knocking at my door at Coca-Cola, and I'm thinking, yeah, whatever. But eventually, he wore me down. And we had I think it was a national meeting that you came to attend, wasn't it? We had a national meeting down at the Wakefield factory where I was based. And I don't think I had time to fill on the agenda, Mike. That's not why you were invited. So Mike was invited along, and he actually carried out this demonstration. And up until then, I was kind of on my phone and doing all the stuff you do, and, you know, and that eventually got my attention, and I thought, hold on a minute. How many seconds did somebody just count? So, you know, I went through this, and that was a moment for me of learning in life, because I just thought, wow, God, I wish I'd seen that before now. You know, so I politely said to Mike, you can stop with the sales pitch. I'm in. You know, and I don't know how many of the other factories went after that, but there was a high number of them, wasn't there? So, yeah. So you know, when we talk about the cost and the pitch you've got to do, I think a lot of it comes, you know, I had to become a salesman. So I had to go in to see the directors and said, I've just had this guy in, showed us this product, talked through the basis of it, you know, and I liked Adam's talk about fire extinguishers. That was a good example to use, you know. And I said, this is what it's going to cost. It was about 8,000 to 10,000 we spent on the site there because of the size of it. I said, but ultimately we can save one person's eyesight. You can save someone being scarred for a long, long time. And he just said, stop talking, just go and do it. Just buy it. I don't know why we're even discussing it. So it was done. You know, and because we were the flagship site in the Coke system, you know, whatever they kind of did, everybody else kind of followed suit. So it made it very, very easy. And then finally on here, very recently, I'm sat on a table with a person that works at Pinderfield, which is a bit scary. We were asked, we got a call, must be a few months, not many months ago. It was this year, wasn't it? Yeah. So there was an attack or two, I believe, in the local area of Leeds. And, you know, Mike knew that we had the product on site, as did Coke. We were very near to Pinderfield's hospital. So we dispatched a guy within 20, 30 minutes with our product and took it to Pinderfield's hospital, and it was used on the patient successfully to help them recover. So, you know, today's kind of based around the community piece, and, you know, it was great that Mike could make those calls early in the morning, and we managed to dispatch someone from our site as quickly as that to help the local hospital and a member of public that was in need. So, and I just call it doing the right thing, human to human. There's not enough of that left, I don't think, in the world. That's it.
Right, guys, so we've got three speakers. I'm sure be happy to take some questions. I think they're all coming up with the same message for you. And they're not based on randomised blinded trials. They're just based on their experience of using this stuff. So let's have some questions for them, please.
Hello. Oh, hello. I'm Melinda Clements from Fujifilm. I'm the head of EH&S for Fujifilm, and we do have DIPHEX on site. Adam, you mentioned that you'd had the 28% splash and you used the DIPHEX the second time. Was it just 150 ml you used?
Yes, so the gentleman that we actually had the splash in his eye is what we would call a mixer. And our mixers all are issued the 50 ml single eye solution. So he used that himself within a few seconds. He'd had the training. He put it on. He obviously immediately when we've interviewed him, done the investigations after, he said the pain went almost immediately. Obviously, we continued to use saline after that, just for continuity reasons. The big thing that stood up for us was, though, when we actually contacted the emergency services. Obviously, he was taken to hospital, via an ambulance. When we spoke to the paramedics and said, we have used diphoterine, it was that blank look, no idea what diphoterine was. So we found that we were explaining, obviously, whilst they're still trying to do their assessment of the injured person, we tried explaining to them what diphoterine was. So what we actually ended up producing after that was a folder with a few pages in it, taken from information that Michael's provided us with. So if we do have an ambulance crew turn up on site that give us that, we don't know what diphoterine is, look again, we can hand them to them, so they've got some documentation they can pass on to other medical professionals. So then we're not trying to bombard them with lots of information when they're actually trying to do their own medical assessment at the same time. So.
Thank you. I was asking because typically we've got high percentages of acids and alkalis.
Yes.
We've got DIPHEX, but we use the 500 ml bottles.
Yes.
I was just interested that you showed the 50 ml one. I thought, that's quite interesting.
So these are carried on person.
Yeah,
by the
we've got a
individual.
couple of sets of those for the mobile workers.
Yeah, so we issue these to the mixers, and we've recently started issuing them to the first aiders on our site, obviously with the training that goes behind it. But obviously in the areas where we do actually do the mixing or breaking into the vessels, or when we're doing the offloads and onloads, we have different variations. So we'll have the mini DAP and the micro DAP in place there as well.
There was one other question I did want to ask, because I noticed both Steph and Adam had mentioned, and the gentleman who was talking from London, Johannes, so we're all talking about 30% solutions, but you used 1 molar in the test. So obviously 1 molar to 30% is like 4% to 30%. It's quite a big difference. So it is as if we're using it, but it's just interesting that we're all talking about 30% concentration of acids and alkalis, but yeah, 4% used in the testing. Would it be as quick as volume-wise?
You know that description of the ambulance paramedic who turns up and's got a blank face? That's my face just now.
Yeah, I can probably help with that. The percentage of the chemical will determine the amount of solution that you're using, whatever solution you're using. Yeah, we use a 1 molar for health and safety reasons. When you've got a crowd of people there, you don't want to be using highly concentrated chemicals just in case things go wrong. Although we try and take every precaution we can, the added precaution of using a low concentration chemical in a public type of arena just for health and safety reasons, that's all. But it helps us to demonstrate the pH values that we're talking about. Yes, if it's more concentrated, you will need more product to decontaminate. Yeah. No, absolutely. The 50 ml, if it's used within 10 seconds, and it's due to be had on the person, that will decontaminate an eye, any chemical, any concentration. Yeah.
Other questions, please? I think you've stunned them into silence. Has anyone got any questions about today's topics?
There's one point I would want to make, and it's something that somebody had a conversation with me the other day. We have our facility 2 defibrillator units. I was asked a couple of months ago to put those on a national register, so that the emergency services are aware if there's defibrillator units in the area. I was asked the same question: do we have the same network for a product such as this. So the emergency services may be aware that there is diphoterene, as you said there, in a building nearby where it may I don't know how the system works, may flag up on the system that 0.3 of a mile away there's a facility with diphoterene on site that can be used if it's not within those first responders sort of application.
Mike, do you want to come in on that? Or my experience up to now is that the emergency services don't know about it, so the answer will be no. But it's something we've discussed quite a lot amongst people today. Sadly, the ambulance services aren't very well represented here, but the MP, who is the chair of Cleveland Fire Authority, she's going to go back and look at that specifically.
Yeah, it's a great observation. We talking about Pinderfield with Steph, that's exactly what we did. We said to Pinderfields, we will give you a list of all of the industry in your region that are currently equipped with diphoterene. That was, well, we've almost gone full circle because that was the whole reason for the day. We believe that this is a community response, a community reaction. And the more that we can make this product available as quickly as we possibly can, the more effective it's going to be. So you're spot on, Adam, in terms of your observation. And that's why we've had that discussion with Pinderfields. We did actually mention it in passing when we had the meeting with the ED department as well, with the James Cook Hospital.
No, I think Andy Hebron and James Cook got the same details I know I have.
Yeah.
The other thing was mentioned earlier was TalkSpace, which is an online resource for any kind of substance which someone might have been exposed to. And one of the emergency department consultants raised the issue, well, our normal first protocol is to look at this, and that diphoterene and hexfluorine are not on those, and they're not on those. So it's something else.
If you look at the IMAN,
Yeah. So again, that's something else that sort of maybe as a company, Prevor and DIPHEX need to look at to actually raise the knowledge there.
I was just thinking, Adam, on that one, the app that you've got that we looked at, would it be possible to add in locations onto that, build it into your app to actually show who's got what and whereabouts it is? Because I think you could quite easily do that, then have an app that we could, certainly from the emergency services, something we could look at, but also members of the public as well, to find out where your nearest sort of product could be. Thanks.
So has anyone got any ideas about what happens now, where we go now with all of this? Has this been actually useful for any of you? Come on, don't give us silence. Is anyone going to go back and actually question some of their various line management and hierarchies and say, can we look at this? Lady.
Myself and my colleagues work at the Burns unit at Newcastle, and I really can't believe that we haven't been using this product for a long time.
There's the Burns consultants in Newcastle, certainly Sanjay Varma, is unconvinced about it. There are various trainees who've been through the region and know about it, and might come back to you who are going to try and work on Mr. Varma and potentially Mrs. Pape. So that's partly personality related, and lots of that is what happens in medicine. Unfortunately, you get strong personalities who then try and guide things in different directions. So it's not evidence based. That
we'll definitely be joining the fight.
Fantastic. Anything else you want to sort of get across today, Mike? If not, looks like we're going to have early doors.
Yeah, I really just a personal thanks to you all, because I know that we lead busy lives, we all do. So for you to take a day out of those lives to just come to an event like this really means a lot to us. As I said, the whole impetus of this, the whole motivation for this, was to try and get a community thinking and talking together. We intend to do this in other areas and get other areas and other regions thinking as well about their current practices, their current protocols, to see whether there is a need for a change, because it's only by change that we're going to affect the way that we deal with things in the future. So my personal thanks to you for attending today. And also, just you'll have seen Kate just running around all over the place with a mic, and she's done so much work organising this. Just a personal thanks to Kate for all of that. Yeah, thank you.
Safe journey back to all of you. Thank you very much indeed.
There's no other amphoteric. Because that's the other thing I was thinking. So if it was a drug, it'd be open license after so many.
So it's not a drug, it's a...
because it's a device, it wouldn't be, so it's going to be...
So it's got a CE mark.
Yeah.
It's a medical, it's under the medical device regulations. It's got a CE mark, so anyone can buy it. There's no